You've been told that when you're spiritually awake, you'll trigger people, that your presence will make unconscious people uncomfortable, that their egos will react to your truth, that you'll be a mirror they can't look into. And I'm going to tell you something that might upset you. If you believe that, you're not awake. You're just playing the most sophisticated ego game there is. I've spent my entire life warning about precisely this trap, the trap of spiritual superiority disguised as enlightenment. Real awakening doesn't trigger people. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't create separation. But the ego loves to dress up in spiritual clothes and call itself awakened. Let me show you what's really happening. First, let's be honest about something. The idea that you trigger people because you're more conscious than them, it feels good. It validates your journey. It explains why relationships are hard. It makes you special. They can't handle my energy. My truth threatens their illusions. I'm too awake for this world. And there's a grain of truth in there. Sometimes, when you change, when you stop playing old games, people do react. But here's the critical distinction. Are they reacting to your awakening, or are they reacting to your judgment? Are they uncomfortable with your presence, or with your need to be seen as more evolved? The moment you think you're awake and others aren't, you've created a division, a hierarchy, a separation between us and them. And that separation, that's the opposite of awakening. That's ego dressed up in spiritual language. Real awakening doesn't create us versus them. It dissolves the boundary entirely. Watts used to talk about the finger pointing at the moon. The teaching is the finger. The truth is the moon. But if you become obsessed with the finger, if you start thinking you're special because you can see the finger clearly, you've missed the moon entirely. I see the finger and you don't is just another way of saying, I'm better than you. It's the ego finding a new way to feel superior, this time through spirituality. And the tragic irony, the more you need others to be asleep to feel awake, the more asleep you actually are. Real awakening doesn't need contrast. It doesn't require other people to be unconscious so you can feel conscious. Simply is. Like the sun doesn't need darkness to know it's the sun. So let's look at what's really happening when you think you're triggering people with your awakening. The first sign you're in spiritual ego, you think people are triggered by your presence, when really they're reacting to your judgment. Let me paint a picture. You're at a family dinner. Everyone's talking about surface level things, jobs, weather, the latest TV show. And you sit there feeling separate. These people are so unconscious, they're not talking about anything real. They can't handle depth. They're stuck in the matrix. And then someone asks you a question, and you respond with something spiritual, something deep, something that, in your mind, is more evolved. Well, I've been exploring the nature of consciousness lately, and the room gets quiet, awkward. Someone changes the subject. You think, see, they can't handle my truth. I'm triggering their egos. They're not ready for this level of awareness. But what actually happened? They felt your condescension. They sensed your judgment. They picked up on the invisible message underneath your words. I'm operating on a higher level than you are. They're not triggered by your awakening. They're hurt by your arrogance. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Truly awake people don't make others feel small. They make others feel seen. Because real awakening dissolves the boundary between self and other. It doesn't reinforce it. When you genuinely see that you and they are the same consciousness in different forms, there's no condescension, there's only compassion. You don't look down on them for talking about TV shows, because you understand that's the dance they're doing right now. And it's no less sacred than your meditation practice. Humans do the human thing, playing different games, and all of it equally the universe experiencing itself. The second sign, you secretly need people to stay unconscious so you can stay awakened. Think about it. If everyone around you suddenly woke up, what would that mean for your identity? If there's no one left to be more evolved, then who are you? This is the ego's game. It needs contrast. It needs to be better than, smarter than, more conscious than. So it finds people who are still asleep and uses them as proof of its own awakening. Look at them, still chasing money, still caught in materialism, still identified with ego, still believing their thoughts. Who is it that's noticing how unconscious they are? Who is it that's keeping score? Who is it that's measuring levels of awakening? That's not awareness. That's the ego wearing a spiritual costume. Real awakening doesn't compare. It doesn't measure. It doesn't need anyone to be less conscious so it can feel more conscious. It sees everyone, including the so-called unconscious, as expressions of the same underlying reality. There's no hierarchy, no ladder of consciousness with you at the top and them at the bottom. Just different waves in the same ocean. And the wave doesn't judge other waves for being too small, too big, too choppy, too calm. It's all just ocean, waving. The third sign you're in spiritual ego. You get defensive when someone questions your awakening. Someone challenges your spiritual beliefs, questions your practices, doesn't validate your journey, maybe even rolls their eyes when you talk about consciousness. And you feel triggered. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts building arguments. You feel the need to prove yourself, to explain, to defend. They just don't understand. They're not ready for this level of consciousness. Their ego is threatened by my truth. But wait, I thought you were the awakened one. I thought you were beyond ego. So why are you so bothered by someone not seeing you as awakened? Why does their skepticism disturb your peace? Why do you need them to validate your spiritual journey? If you're truly awake, why do you need anyone else to know it? If you're at peace, why does their doubt steal your peace? The answer? Because part of you is still seeking validation, still needing to be seen as special, still attached to the identity of awakened person. And that attachment, that's ego. Pure, simple, spiritually dressed ego. Real awakening doesn't get defensive. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't require anyone's agreement or approval. It's content to be unseen, unrecognized, even misunderstood. Because it's not performing, it's just being. You could spend your whole life being called unconscious by others. And if you're truly awake, it wouldn't touch you. Because you're not identified with being the awakened one. The fourth sign, you're keeping score of your spiritual journey like it's a competition. You meditate every day, you've done the retreats, you've sat with teachers, you've read the books, all of them. You've had the insights, the experiences, the breakthroughs, and you use these as evidence, proof that you are further along than others. I've been practicing for 10 years. I've done Vipassana. I've studied with monks. I've had ego death experiences. I've integrated plant medicine. I understand non-duality. But here's the paradox Watts loved to point out. The more you accumulate spiritual achievements, the further you get from actual awakening. Because awakening isn't something you achieve. It's something you recognize was always here. It's not the end of a journey. It's the realization that there was never anyone on a journey to begin with. The you that's trying to become awakened is the very illusion awakening dissolves. So when you're counting your spiritual credentials, measuring your progress, comparing your level to others, you're still in the game. You're still playing. And the game is ego, even if the playing field is spirituality. The scholar who's read 1,000 books on Zen hasn't taken a single step. But the person who sits and does nothing might be doing everything. Because it's not about accumulation, it's about subtraction. Letting go, relaxing the need to get anywhere. The fifth and most subtle sign. You use "I'm awakened" as an excuse to avoid uncomfortable growth. Someone gives you feedback, tells you you hurt them, points out a pattern in your behavior that's causing harm. And you respond, "That's their projection. They're triggered by my energy. I'm just holding up a mirror to their shadow." Translation, I don't need to look at myself because I'm already awake. The problem is them, not me. This is spiritual bypassing, using awakening as a shield against accountability. And it's incredibly common, because it feels so much better to think you're triggering someone's ego than to consider that maybe, just maybe, you actually hurt them. Maybe your brutal honesty was just cruelty without empathy. Maybe your detachment was just emotional unavailability. Maybe your not playing games was just refusing to take responsibility for how your actions affect others. Real awakening makes you more sensitive to others, not less. More accountable, not less. More willing to look at your own patterns, not less. Because you realize there's no separate self to defend, so there's nothing to protect. You can hear feedback without it threatening your identity, because your identity isn't awakened person. Your identity is nothing, everything, the whole process. And when someone says, "You hurt me," you don't need to spiritually bypass. You can just say, "I'm sorry, tell me more." So if being awakened doesn't mean triggering people or being more evolved, what does it actually mean? Awakening is the recognition that you're not a separate self navigating a hostile world. You're the whole thing, the universe experiencing itself in this particular form. And when you truly get that, not intellectually, but experientially, something shifts. You stop needing to be special, because you realize everything is equally special and equally ordinary. You stop judging unconscious people, because you see there's no one who's unconscious. There are just different expressions of the same consciousness. You stop getting triggered by skepticism, because you're not attached to being seen as awakened. You stop collecting spiritual achievements, because you realize there's nowhere to get to. You're already here. You always were. And ironically, this is when you actually start to embody something real, something that doesn't need to announce itself. People might feel peaceful around you, not because you're triggering their ego, but because you're not judging them. They might ask you questions, not because you're performing wisdom, but because you're genuinely present. They might sense something different about you, but it won't be superiority. It'll be ease, ordinariness, a lack of pretense. You'll be like water. Water doesn't try to be holy. It doesn't announce its purity. It doesn't judge the dirt it cleanses. It just flows, naturally, effortlessly, without needing anyone to notice how flowing it is. That's Wu-Wei. That's what real awakening looks like. So how do you know if you're in spiritual ego? Here's a simple test. Ask yourself, do I need other people to be less awake for me to feel awakened? If the answer is yes, you're in ego. Do I get defensive when someone questions my spiritual beliefs or practices? If yes, you're in ego. Do I use my spiritual journey as evidence that I'm better, more evolved, or more conscious than others? If yes, you're in ego. Do I feel superior when I'm around unconscious people? Do I silently judge them? Do I feel separate from them? If yes, you're in ego. And here's the beautiful thing. Realizing you're in spiritual ego, that itself is a moment of awakening. Because the ego can't see itself. It's too close, too identified. So the fact that you're seeing it means something else is looking. That's awareness. That's the real thing. Not the story about being awakened, but the awareness that watches all stories, including that one. Here's the final thing I want you to know. If you've been playing the I'm awake, you're asleep game, you're not alone. Everyone who's walked a spiritual path has fallen into this trap. I've fallen into it, you've fallen into it, every teacher who's ever taught has fallen into it. It's the ego's last stand, its final attempt to survive by becoming spiritual. And the way out isn't to feel ashamed, it's to see it clearly, to laugh at it even. Oh, look at that. My ego found a way to feel superior through spirituality. How clever, how predictable, how utterly human. And then let it go. Not by trying to be more awakened, but by relaxing the need to be awakened at all. You don't trigger people because you're awake. You don't make them uncomfortable with your truth. You're just here, like a tree is here, like a mountain is here. Not trying to be anything, not proving anything, just being what you are. And when you stop trying to be the awakened one, when you stop needing to trigger the egos of the unconscious, you might actually experience what awakening really is. Not a state you achieve, not an identity you wear, not a level you reach while others lag behind, but a recognition, a relaxation, a returning home to what you always were. You won't trigger anyone because you're spiritually awake, but you might inspire them, not through superiority, but through genuine presence. You might help them, not by showing them how unconscious they are, but by seeing them without judgment. You might even awaken them, not by being more evolved, but by dissolving the illusion that anyone is more or less evolved than anyone else. Because in the end, there's no one who's awake and no one who's asleep. There's just this, happening, now. And the moment you stop dividing the world into awakened and unawakened, that might be the first genuinely awake moment you've ever had. Welcome, not to being special, but to being ordinary, which is the most extraordinary thing of all.